Recently, I finally got around to reading Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros, and I did not like it, which I am aware is a hot take for this book. And I had so many passionate opinions about this. I had to make this review because it's just so not good. I'm sorry. I hate that so many people like it. The first big issue I had with this book is that right from the beginning, it's so predictable. That Dylan guy dying right at the start, I have never seen something coming more than that. And then immediately upon meeting Dane as a character, I just knew that he was going to betray Violet in some way. I didn't see this coming from the start, but I saw this coming. When it turns out that Brennan is alive, so predictable. As soon as Xaden was like, there's only one guy that can save her, the fact that Yarros left it right to the last page, you know, reveal that piece of information, did nothing because you could tell. The reason that a lot of this stuff is predictable is because literally everything is underdeveloped. From the relationships to the world building, nothing gives anything. The lack of nuance and history in the Dane-Violet friendship made his whole betrayal just seem really, really off, because you didn't get enough of those two as friends for it to feel that bad. And this extends into pretty much all the relationships in this book. The Violet-Xaden relationship really lacked development in every single possible way. They just aren't enemies to lovers. There was no enemy there. You were supposed to believe that these two didn't like each other for whatever reason, and that Xaden was going to kill her because of some convoluted national and family history. And Xaden literally never once tries to do anything but help her, so that immediately fell through. Actual enemies to lovers is brilliant. Sarah J Maas does it so ridiculously well. You can do it well and have it actually make you feel emotions. In this, it wasn't developed. It kind of went from this weird lukewarm rivals vibe immediately to Violet randomly lusting over him, to them like randomly being in love. There is no like flow to this book. And I think part of the reason that the enemies to lovers was underdeveloped is because the world building in this book was so lazy. I don't know if this was just me, but I don't think any of the history really made sense. You were kind of just given these two people that apparently didn't like each other with no reasoning as to why they didn't really like each other. They've just been at war forever. I think Yarros relies on fantasy tropes a little bit too much. It makes the history really not compelling. In fantasy, it's a pretty common thing that you have two warring nations. In good fantasy books, it is given enough context to work properly. That's not what happens in this book. For example, Sarah J Maas. She is a very good fantasy writer. Her stories are compelling because she gives us enough context and experience for them to be compelling. You have the whole like fae and human tension, and you also have the tension between Prithian and Hybern in the A Court of Thorns and Roses series. You are given enough to understand that there are genuine stakes there, and you know enough about the characters, and she gives you enough history of the world to understand why that's happening. Yarros doesn't do that. She just gives you a bunch of random information that is really disjointed, and then she expects the stakes to still feel like they have meaning. She does just rely far too much on ideas rather than context. To go back to the whole relying on tropes thing, the whole Xaden, Violet being able to talk to each other in their minds thing, like, I'm sorry, but that's literally Favourite and Reese in Akama. The training where they were like kind of pitting fights against each other was very divergent, and the climbing the wall thing, Throne of Glass, the first Throne of Glass book where Selena has to do that. I'm not against reusing ideas, but you have to have good ideas of your own to be able to give everything else form. Yarros is doing it so incredibly lazily that the book reads like this weird amalgamation of a bunch of other fantasy books and not something complete and individual on its own. My next issue was again, this might be a personal thing, but I do have actual like reasoning to back it up. I did not like Violet. It does all lean back to the fact that everything's underdeveloped, and that also includes the characters. I think it's because she was the main character, so she was obviously the focal point of the whole thing. One of my big issues was that her motivation randomly switched like 120 pages in with no reasoning. Up until that point, she was kind of just, I've been forced to do this and I want to survive, so that's what I'm gonna do. Then all of a sudden she just wanted to be a rider. And there was no gradual flow. There was no slide into this. It was just this snap, and all of a sudden that was all she wanted to do. This is like a really tiny thing that really got on my nerves. Why wasn't she trained from birth if her mother always knew that she was gonna put her into the riders anyway? We are given this really vague reasoning of this mysterious illness that she had, and you kind of get the sense that it was because her dad was protecting her. You're given no context as to why the dad dies either. Maybe it was from this mysterious illness, or maybe we find this out in the second book, which I have not read, so I obviously can't comment on that. If it is in the second book, like, the fact that it's making the first book so not good means that it should probably have been in the first book. Back to why I don't like Violet. Her character seems to change all the time. Apparently she loves history, she's amazing at history, but then on page 81 she forgets whether Fenrir Orson had a sister or not. Considering how much history she apparently knows, surely she should know that. She's supposed to be really smart, then Yarros just doesn't write her smart. Violet frequently forgets random people's names, and this is a really overused thing. It's like an expositional tool. It is a way to introduce new characters, but you kind of do it maybe once, not the 20 times that Yarros seemed to do it. The last thing that really annoyed me about Violet's changing personality was that she was too scared to answer a question in that battle class thing, but as soon as she's caught in the tree, like watching over Xaden's meeting, she starts to taunt him. Either she's timid or she's not. Like, you can't have it both ways. That's not good characterization. Yarros is being lazy and she wants to make her likable, so she's just doing whatever is going to make her more likable. If she's being shy, a lot of people will be able to relate to that, whereas if she's taunting Xaden, kind of the person you want to be is the brave person. The thing with all of the characters is that they are all insanely one-dimensional. Dane has like one personality trait. Well, Dane has two personality traits, and one of them is being the worst. The second one is his whole rule thing. That's where his character begins and ends. Xaden is, he's protective, that's it. You don't get any real emotion from any of the characters. Yarros just expresses any emotion so heavy-handedly. There was a bit where you could like see the sadness in Xaden's eyes, but it didn't really make sense. Or there was the bit where she clumsily revealed that he couldn't sleep at night or something. There were a bunch of weird jolty time jumps that just didn't make the story flow, and which really took me out of it when I was reading. There was that time when Mira had to go fight the Griffins, and then the chapter ended and all of a sudden it was like 2 days later. And then one that really got me was when Violet kills Jack, and then it's randomly the end of the games when the next chapter starts. That's all my really big points. There's a bunch of small things that I'm also going to go over now, and I wrote them all out on my phone. A lot of the names felt not fantasy, which took me out of the atmosphere. Jack Barlow just reminded me of Jack Harlow every time I read it. Violet says fourth instead of quarter at the bottom of page 113. This girl is supposed to be smart. There was a K-drama pullback on page 129 where Violet had her hand grabbed and pulled back into Xaden. Oh, I literally couldn't cope. Like, it was so cringy and ridiculous. Sometimes I live for that, but this was just not it. There was no chemistry. There was literally no chemistry between Violet and Xaden. Another cringy little romance thing was that eyes kept dropping to lips, and it happened all the time. Last thing I'm gonna say, it's the tiniest little thing, but it annoyed me so much. Why does Violet fall from her dragon at the end, knowing full well that if she dies, so do her dragons and Xaden's dragon and Xaden? It felt like the author couldn't decide whether this string of deaths was a real thing or not. It's a real thing that just makes everything else unravel because you aren't putting the effort into the small things, which is literally this whole book, is that you aren't putting enough effort into the world building, which means you aren't putting enough effort into the characters and the characters' relationships, which means the whole book is predictable and also boring because you are repeating yourself so much and you're repeating other people's ideas so much without coming up with any of your own. Really needed this rant. Anyway, thank you if you managed to make it to the end of this. My Instagram and Goodreads will be in the description if you want to hear any more of my opinions on books. Goodbye.